Ben Parry, composer, singer, arranger and producer, many thanks for joining us for the first episode of Suffolk County Music Services Alumni Series 2022. This series is to celebrate the achievements of musicians from Suffolk and to invite you to share your experiences with the next generation of Suffolk's young musicians. It's great to have you with us, Ben.
My pleasure. It's lovely to be talking to you.
At what stage in your life, Ben, did you realise that you wanted to work in the music profession?
I love this question because there is actually a pivotal moment when I realised that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I grew up in a very musical family in Ipswich. My dad was the organist at St Margaret's Church in Ipswich, and we all went to the local schools. When I was 7 years old, which to give away my age was in 1972, we went to Snape Maltings to go and see an opera written by Benjamin Britten, who was, I'm sure a lot of the listeners know, was probably, one of the greatest composers of the 20th century, but also came from Suffolk. He was born in Lowestoft and he founded the Albury Festival. And we went to see an opera that he'd written called The Little Sweep at Snape Maltings, and my dad took me along. And while we were waiting to go in, Benjamin Britten arrived in his sports car and drew up. And my dad said, "Oh, that's Benjamin Britten there. Let's go and say hello." And I actually met Britten, which, looking back on it was an extraordinary thing. Didn't realise it at the time. No. But I remember going into the hall, the concert hall, and watching the opera. And at certain points in this opera, there are songs that the audience sings. And one of these songs is called the Night Song, where all the birds of the forest all join in. And we were singing this song. And I remember being completely transported into a musical world. And I thought, this means so much to me. And I remember at that point thinking, I want to be a musician when I grow up. And sure enough, I am. But it was absolutely a pivotal moment, and there were lots of them, but it really was around about that time, so I was quite young.
Wow, yeah, that is quite young, and I wonder whether lots of people watching this will have already made up their minds, like you had, ostensibly at that point.
A great question again, and I mean, I think the fact that I was brought up in a very privileged family. We were very lucky. We were very fortunate with the things that we had. I was surrounded by music all the time. Mm-hmm. I think in a way, I took it for granted. Okay. Those opportunities were provided to me. I know how challenging it is, in education at the moment, to find those opportunities, but they are there if you look for them. I was lucky enough, as I grew older, became a teenager, we had the local county orchestra, and I joined that. Actually ended up leading it. I was a violinist, and lucky me, for my final year before I went off to university, I was actually the leader of the orchestra. So I think there was a kind of degree of me just sort of taking it, this is what life is. I was lucky that I had musical parents, so they pointed me in the right direction as well. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, and we all played instruments as well. So I can't really answer it in the sense that I kind of feel I had to kind of find my way through, because those opportunities were offered to me. But as I say, I mean, I think one of the most important things in the work that I do now with, like, for example, the National Youth Choir, I know that those opportunities are there, and the important thing is to go out and find them.
Yeah, so it was obvious that music was normalised for you to a greater extent, wasn't it? Just surrounded by it all the time. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. So I grew up as a singer, so I had a good treble voice. When my voice changed, I carried on singing as a baritone and a bass. At school, I got lots of opportunity to sing, but also to play the violin. And at a certain point, actually, round about, in my sixth form, I thought, because I'm leading the orchestra, it'd be great, wouldn't it? Because I could play the violin and I could be a violinist. Actually, my life took a different route. I applied for university, and because again the opportunity was afforded to me, I applied for Cambridge. to study music, but also to sing in one of the choirs. There are lots of choirs in the chapels. And I was beguiled by the place. I have family who still live there, and I went over to Cambridge, and it's a beautiful place. But I was just completely fascinated by all these different colleges and stuff. So I did what we call a choral scholarship. So you do an audition to get into one of the chapel choirs, and I was successful. So as soon as I'd left school, I went straight off to university at Cambridge, and there, of course, I met a whole new load of people, and my eyes were open to not just playing the violin, although of course I met many violinists who were far better than me, including, I should say, my wife Catherine, who is a professional violinist. We were in the same year at uni, but I sang as well. I met some friends. I made friends with people who were a bit more kind of in the jazz idiom. So I thought, oh yeah, no, I really enjoy this. So I did lots of cabaret. I did musicals. I did Guys and Dolls, the famous musical where I played Nathan Detroit, and I sang all these great songs. We formed a cabaret group of our own. So I got really immersed into kind of a different style of singing, not like chapel singing in a chapel choir. And so through university, I was constantly immersed in lots of different musical styles. When I came out of university, I did a little bit of work with the cabaret group. We sort of thought we could take this professional, and we did it professionally for a year, but made no money whatsoever. So I thought I need to get a job doing this. And at that point, so we're talking 1987, a job came up in a professional vocal group called the Swingle Singers. They're now called the Swingles, but this is a group that was formed in the early 60s in France, and they used to scat their way through classical music like Bach and Mozart, but with jazz bass and drums, and everything was kind of really cool and slick, and everything with a nice kind of 2/4 beat in the jazz style. And I did 5 auditions to try and get into that group. They kept wanting me to come back and sing, and I was eventually offered a place, and then kind of my journey was set really as a professional singer. And I was only 22.
Okay.
And off I went, toured with the Swingles for 5 years, and that kind of set me then on a journey of very different musical styles. So doing a lot of classical, doing a lot of church music, doing a lot of what we call secular music, so not involved with the church, but also in different musical styles as well, as I say, so classical and jazz and pop, and we can talk about that in a little bit. So my route was, in a way, it was not predetermined, but I know that one talks a lot about luck and being in the right place at the right time and so on. All those things came into play as I started my music career.
Interesting. And I wonder if, like me, you found a lot of the excellent musicians that you met through university weren't necessarily all studying music.
Absolutely. Now that's a really important point, Benjamin, because yes, you're absolutely right. In fact, I didn't study music in my final year at uni. I gave up music, and I actually did a degree in art history, because I was very interested in art as well, and I used to do a lot of drawing and stuff at school. So in fact, I don't even have a music degree.
Okay, interesting.
So there you go.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Again, very interesting to discuss that, because yes, I thought I love performing, I love singing, and therefore, a lot of my work is going to be that. But at the same time, with the Swingles, I then found myself in the recording studio. Okay. And I got very interested in fact, you can see the acoustic panels there. I'm actually in my little home studio here with all my keyboards and everything in front of me. So I got very involved in that. I also got involved to a degree with the administration of the group. So how you run an arts project or whatever. And I like to think, because I will admit, I'm quite a self-confident person, or I have been throughout my career. I like having ideas about things. So there's a kind of slight kind of entrepreneur, enterprising thing there going, an impresario, if you like.
Sure.
So, when we were talking about doing a particular album or doing a new project, I was thinking, well, perhaps we could do something on stage where it involves this or that or everything else. So I knew I wasn't just going to be a performer. As a musician, one can be a producer, one can be a director, an administrator, a manager, so many different areas to plug into. Now, jumping forward a lot and thinking of all the jobs that I've done through the subsequent years, one of the things that I do, quite apart from National Youth Choir and the other things, is that I actually run my own professional choir called London Voices that does a lot of recording work. So we're on a lot of film soundtracks. There'll be lots of films I could show off about that we've sung on, but I actually manage the group as well.
Okay.
So my administrative skills have been honed over the subsequent years as well. So being able, if one's in a band or whatever, are you the sort of person who could think about doing a tour somewhere and organizing a schedule and writing a schedule down and making sure that people are in the right place at the right time? So those administrative skills all came to the fore as well while I was developing as a musician.
Stumbling into opportunities.
Oh, here we go. The
Down the rabbit hole.
$64 million question. When one is thinking about a career in music, there's a kind of list of things that you think, how important are these things in a particular order? One will be, like you say, Benjamin, luck.
Yep.
Being in the right place at the right time, being good at your job, being efficient, being a nice person.
Yeah.
Getting the job done in time, so deadlines, all those things come to the fore. Now, in whatever order you arrange them, for you personally, they're going to become, 1 to 5 or 1 to 6.
Sure.
Luck, it's so difficult to quantify. Yes, I think luck is very important in this industry, particularly because at the moment, and throughout history, the arts have struggled. They've struggled to maintain an importance within society. But as human beings, we rely on the arts to entertain us, to move us, to challenge us, to do all those things. So they are I would say, absolutely integral to good society. Now, persuading other people to adhere to that is a challenge, and it's difficult, and there are challenges in our society and in the arts as well. But I would say that I have been extremely lucky. I've been lucky because I feel that I've endorsed all the other things that I was talking about. So being efficient, being a nice hopefully I'm nice, and a good colleague, a good collaborator, and so on. So all those things will heighten your chances of luck within the industry, I would say, at least.
Yeah, and that resonates with me, certainly. That luck does play an important part, but you can go a long way to generating those lucky opportunities, can't you? Just by being open-minded and throwing yourself into things and pouring everything you've got into each thing that you do to get the best out of it. That certainly makes a lot of sense.
There's one other thing I would add to that, is having a sense of reality, because we're all very much immersed now on TV, aren't we, with talent shows and reality shows, and you get people on there saying, if you follow your dream, you will make it. Well, you might not. And actually, failure is not a bad thing, because it gives you a sense of reality. If you try something and you try again and it just doesn't work, then there's a certain point that you've got to kind of move away and say, actually, that's not for me, but I could do this. That old adage of, if one door closes, another door opens. I think that's possibly true as well. But there has to be a sense of reality, I think, in our industry. I totally can. And a pivotal moment for me was we'd moved up to Scotland because my wife Catherine had got a job as a violinist in the Scottish Chamber Orchestra.
Right, great,
lovely job. We lived in Edinburgh for 8 years. Our kids were tiny. Their early years were spent living in that beautiful city. I set up my own professional group called Dunedin Consort, which is now doing really well. It's suddenly turned into a Baroque orchestra for some reason. I mean, it started out as a singing group. And we were having a lovely life there. And then suddenly one day I saw an advert in a music magazine for a director of music at a big posh boys' school in London.
Okay.
It's called St. Paul's School. And it was a director of music job. Now, my dad had been a music director at Northgate School for many years when it was a grammar school. Yeah. Indeed. And we all went to Northgate, and he'd always said to me, "Oh, well, you could always get a nice job in a school." And I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. I was going to be a performer, and I was going to be on stage, and And I suddenly saw myself thinking, actually, you know what? We're at the stage. I'm at the stage in my life where I could do with some security, and perhaps I could offer something as a head of department in a school. Sure. Went down, did the interviews, did the whole day. I remember at the end of it thinking, yeah, I could do this. I had to teach a lesson. I'd never taught a lesson in music before, but I taught one. Okay. I took a rehearsal, which of course was easy for me. I had lots of chats with the head the head teacher and the other music staff, and I came out of that school thinking, I could probably do that, but I'm really the wild card because I'm not trained as a teacher and I've never worked in a school before.
Sure.
And they said, we'll let you know by the weekend. And I barely walked out of the school gate and they rang me up on my mobile phone and said, we'd like to offer you the job.
Amazing.
And I went, oh my word. Okay, so what do I do now? I'm in Edinburgh with my young family, loving living in Scotland. Do I go down that route, or do I just play safe and carry on with what I'm doing? And we made the decision to move down to London, and not to go into a long story, but it was a big challenge for us. Suddenly we were living in London. I was doing a job. I found it really hard the first few months because I wasn't used to that school environment.
Okay.
I did it for 5 years. I learned to love the job. I think I made a difference in the school. Then something else happened and my life changed again completely, and I went in another direction, which we could mention very briefly. But I was head of a very, very big, thriving music department. It was a boys' school. The boys were brilliant, of course. We did some amazing concerts. I had to deal with very pushy parents. I had to, organize a huge set of teachers who used to come in and do lessons. But I knew I could do it all, and I had to teach as well. So I taught A-level for the first time in my life, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But it was, do I give up my performing career to do it? And I did. But slowly and surely, elements of that came back in while I was doing that job. And to give him his due, the headmaster who appointed me, he then left after a year, but he said, no, we want a professional musician because we want the kids at the school to see, that kind of area of work that I was doing in the music industry, because we think that it could be really inspiring to them. Sure. So, I suddenly there was a chink in the road. I took it, and I'm glad I did. I wouldn't go back to it because I'm now at a different point in my career, but I don't think one should ever close those doors when those opportunities arrive. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we talked about was being a nice person. Turning up and doing a good job is another one as well. But being a good colleague, I mean, that would apply. All these are transferable skills, aren't they, Benjamin? This will work in any industry that you're working in. If you're going to be in the pharmaceutical industry or whatever, or in the fire service or county council, all these things are transferable. Being a good colleague, I think, is really important. And one very interesting thing with London Voices is because I book, say, for example, we're asked to sing in a recording session with 40 singers. I will book 40 singers. Now, all those singers are what we call freelance. So they maintain their own career. They don't do a job that they're paid for. They are literally rung up or emailed and said, turn up to this studio, sing for 3 hours, go away, and you will be paid some money. End of contract. And that's it. And that's how a lot of my colleagues work. They are freelance musicians. And what I would say is, and I think this is really important, you are only as good as your last piece of work. I.e., if you turn up and you're grumpy, or you don't sing the right notes, or you're late, or your voice isn't up to it, and you struggle, you won't get booked again. It's as simple as that. So actually, I think being a good colleague, being in the right place at the right time is good. We talked about luck a little bit earlier, didn't we? Being efficient is really important. If you're the sort of musician who requires preparation, if you perhaps if your reading skills aren't as good as you think they should be, then go and do a bit of work on it. Be prepared. So when you turn up and you're thrown into something, and I as a musician, I don't know whether you're like this, I love the spontaneity sometimes of the work that I do. So I could turn up to a recording session, I have no idea what the music is. And if I'm in charge, if I'm on the podium conducting, I look at this music and I go, right, okay, here we go. There is no rehearsal in a film recording session. You literally, the light goes on and they've all got to sing the right notes. So I love that spontaneity, but that comes through a lot of experience and being confident without being pushy is another one as well.
Sure.
So I think those kind of characteristics would serve you very well if you were thinking that this is something that you might like to do. And I think, as I say, I think one of the most important things is these are life skills. So if you do that in your industry, then socially or whatever else, they're gonna stand you in good stead as well.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things is at that age, is to try and get as much experience as possible in all manner. I mean, you just said, that the entertainment and the music industry is huge. It's so wide ranging. So just concentrating on one thing is fine. If you want to go and study drums at Leeds College of Music, because that's your thing, that's fine. But don't close any other doors just yet. You will find that there is a pathway. There is a natural pathway as a musician and a creative, because it eats us up, doesn't it? Creativity, we can't get away from it. It's our lifeblood. But at the same time, I wouldn't close off any avenues. As I say, I've been a music teacher. I've been the head of the junior department at the Royal Academy of Music. I've run the National Youth Choir. I conduct London Voices. I've been assistant director of music at King's College, Cambridge, for heaven's sake, conducting the choir in that beautiful chapel. I've never closed off anything. And I would certainly say that is one of the most important things as a younger person. I think as one gets older, one understands what the priorities are, and you probably want to concentrate on those things a little later on down the road. But just be very wary. And I remember saying this to my students at the Junior Academy of Music, because they come in and they'd be practicing 8 hours a day on the violin. You say, I'm going to go to conservatoire and I'm going to do this. And I go, well, that's fine. But at your age, you could also try this. Just look at the way that your teacher teaches a lesson, because teaching might be something that you might do later in life. So never turn off any taps of those experiences that you're getting. I'd also say, something that's I've really benefited from is working with young people in whatever format it might be, whether it's a workshop or a rehearsal or a concert or anything like that, is that idea of nurturing talent and enthusiasm. If you're enthusiastic, if you think you've got the talent, that's fine, and that's something that you can hone and improve as you go on. Your natural enthusiasm is just there within you, so use that to the full effect. I'm not great at networking. I don't like the idea of having to stand up in front of people and saying, "Look at me, aren't I great?"
Mm-hmm.
But it is a kind of slight necessary evil in our industry that you've got to be out there. You've got to show yourself for what your worth is. So be courageous. Have those conversations with people. I think the dialogue that we've been having over the last few years, and the fact that we're actually having this conversation now, I think is so important, particularly in the aftermath of the pandemic, where we were all shut down and we could only do it online. But talking to people, getting more and more information, I think is such an important thing, because you never know what door is going to open. And it might take you off in a completely different direction. I mentioned earlier about that chink in the road when I suddenly became a teacher. That's happened to me 4 or 5 times in my career. And I rejoice in the fact that I've had such a broad experience throughout my career. I've never sort of closed off anything to say, I only do this. And I think that's really important, particularly at a younger age.
Yeah.
Music has remained a constant. It is my lifeblood. I can't, if I weren't doing music, I would be a gardener.
Okay.
I know that, and I may well be a gardener in 10 years' time if I decide I don't want to do music anymore. But what I would say, it's the kind of it's the peripheral things with music that sometimes are the challenges.
Okay.
Whether it be how you organize your time. I mean, I tell you, one of the most important things as a musician is be organized.
Okay.
I like to think that I am very organized. I actually, I'm going to be bold and say that I know that I am. From my colleagues, but administrative stuff does get on top of you, and those are the things that have challenged me before. As far as music is concerned, it's a no deal. It's just that has remained the constant throughout. My dad was one of my greatest inspirations. He was such an interesting guy. As I say, he taught at Northgate School.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't like me in the sense that he wasn't super confident, but he was such a kind, warm-hearted individual, and was just intent on nurturing young people as a teacher and as a choir master. And so I learned a huge amount from him, and also from a musical point of view. Benjamin Britten's music is very, very close to my heart as a native of Suffolk, and the fact that Britten was such a brilliant technician at writing music, his music speaks to me very, very strongly.
Interesting. So it's the technical aspects that particularly appeal, but through that technical mastery there's obviously a great emotional connection for you with that music. Yeah,
it's so interesting, analysing a composer, because Britten was not without his own demons. Mm-hmm. He struggled with his sexuality and his with depression, and yet sometimes one finds, and it's so interesting to analyse this, is that through that adversity, some of the most amazing creativity comes. You think of a composer like Rachmaninoff, mm-hmm. what could be better than Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2, or his Second Symphony, which if you don't like classical music, just sit down and listen to the slow movements of Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony. This is a guy who had inner turmoil, and yet through that, this outpouring of the most beautiful,
unspeakable beauty, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. It's great. I mean, what a melody to write.
Yeah,
it's just extraordinary. So yeah, Britten, he was an amazing technician, and I know that lots of musicians don't read music, and that's not a problem. But as a technician, understanding how music works, I think has really informed certainly my journey.
Great.
I don't think anything can beat live music making, and I have to say, this was borne out. It was laid bare in the pandemic, when, of course, none of us could experience either participating in live music making or even listening to it. And there was one little tiny oasis in October 2020. We'd had the big lockdown. The summer we began to sort of appear out of our bunkers, and just before the second lockdown in November, I got together with 12 of our singers from the National Youth Choir, and we went to Snape Maltings and we did a little 3-day residential. We were very careful, we all had screens, we were socially distanced, but we actually sang a little performance of some music in the Britain studio, which is the small venue.
Lovely space though.
Yeah, great. And we sang some music, and honestly, it was so overpowering. We were all in tears because it was just extraordinary. And I even put it down to the most visceral of things, that actually you could experience the air vibrating in the room. And that thing with whatever performance it is, whether it's if it's Coldplay performing at a concert and they get to the end of the song and everybody goes nuts, and you feel that energy in the room, or if you're in a concert, we're in a classical concert, and the orchestra or the choir performing something so beautiful and it ends silently, and there's just that moment of silence, and then the audience applauds or whatever. Just that notion of the resonance of a room with performers in it was just extraordinary to experience that again after so long with not being able to do it. So last night, I was there's a lovely concert hall in London called the Conductor Hall, and my London voices were performing with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and we did the music to Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, music written by Felix Mendelssohn, very famous 19th century composer. Beautiful tunes, and just sitting, I wasn't performing because it was only upper voices, so they sing the fairy parts. So I sat in the auditorium and I just listened, and I thought, gosh, this is really quite something, just sitting in an audience listening to live music. So much as I love mucking around in my studio here and creating electronic music, nothing beats a live performance.
Ben Parry, thank you very much for sharing your time and your experiences with us. We will look forward to editing the videos and putting it up for our students to watch, and we'll hopefully get a chance to come and see you soon in one of your many endeavours.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for chatting.